Good morning, everybody. One of the commenters here on one of our videos the other day, that was Diaz, asked us, I don't remember, there was some numbers after that, asked us to speak about the allegations that he made that the Talmud is filled with racist filth and support, God forbid, of pedophilia. Yesterday we made a video debunking the claims that somehow the Talmud condones pedophilia. I recommend that you watch that video. The fact of the matter is that it's absolutely forbidden, obviously, in the Talmud, and you don't need the Talmud to tell you that. And that was kind of the point that I was making, is that a lot of these things that people are saying, there's something called common sense, that comes before anything. When it comes to racism, I'll be honest, it is a little bit more nuanced. But like I said from the beginning, that absolutely there's no room for any kind of sexual perversion in the Talmud. But when it comes to racism, the truth is there are passages in the Talmud that can be interpreted as racist. So I think, for those who are on the outside who might not be believing what I'm saying, I think the fact that I'm being honest about the racism in the Talmud should hopefully bear evidence and witness that I'm being honest about the claims of perversion. When it comes to racism, like I'm saying, it's nuanced. And there's certainly are certain passages in the Talmud that at the very least could be interpreted as that are supportive of, let's say, religious discrimination that is not race-based. And there is a small amount of racism, but there's also a tremendous amount of anti-racism. I don't mean like now that the woke kids are using this term that really kind of means the opposite of what it actually is. But what I mean is that there's really things that are really progressive for that time fighting against racism in the Talmud. We have to first and foremost recognize is that the Talmud, what is the Talmud again? A lot of people don't know. I'm going to probably make a separate video discussing a little bit about the type of rhetoric that people who have probably never picked up a book of the Talmud, never held in their hands, have no idea what it is, but they just use this word as kind of a catch-all for whatever they think is evil that's coming out of the Jewish communities. I will have to make a separate video about that, and at this point I simply want to talk about what it actually is instead of what people perceive it to be. Historically, what the text actually is, and how Jewish tradition views the Talmud. It's, first of all, there's not one Talmud, there are two Talmuds. There's the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, even though we called the Jerusalem Talmud, was actually mostly composed in the Galilee, in the northern part of the Holy Land. But they call it the Jerusalem Talmud. It's sometimes actually, particularly if you find some older books in English, they sometimes will call it the Palestinian Talmud, actually. Which, of course, would not be the traditional name. The traditional name is Talmud Yerushalmi, which Jerusalem Talmud is the best translation of that term. That's a rather obscure text. It's not very widely studied. I do study a little bit every night. I try, if I'm able to do a little bit. It's a much more terse text, and it's a much more difficult text to study. And it's older than the Babylonian Talmud. But the main, when most people speak of the Talmud, they say, we learn to blot Gemara. We're talking about the Babylonian Talmud. And that is considered to be more authoritative in a certain sense than the Jerusalem Talmud as well. Both of those Talmuds, both the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, are based on the Mishna, which is the essential core of the Talmud. And so the Mishna is the earliest part of the Talmud that was redacted and authorized, we'll say. And it came about in the form that we know it around the year 200 of the Common Era, and it's based upon the Bible, but a lot of the teachings that we know were coming about to be formulated that are post-biblical, really at the end of what the Jewish biblical era would be considered, meaning the time of Malachi, around the time when the Second Temple was built. And that's kind of in Jewish tradition where the transition essentially happened from the prophets to the Anshe Knesset HaGadolah, the men of the great synagogue or the great assembly. It's really men and women, so you could say the people of the great assembly. And then that transition from that point, which included the last prophets of the Bible and the first rabbis, and that's where the transition came about to the Rabbinical Era, the various Rabbinical eras in history, which in Jewish tradition you have certain, points in history where the leading rabbis would be called by a particular title or name. And so the name that was used for the era from the closing of the Bible until the Mishna, which is several hundred years, those would be the Tanaim. That's a plural. The singular would be Tana, which simply is an Aramaic word for a teacher. And so those rabbis would be called the Tanaim, singular would be the Tana. After the close of the Mishnaic period, then you have the Amoraim, and the singular would be Amora, and those would be the rabbis of the time of the Gemara, of the second part of the Talmud, both the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud that are post the Mishnah. So, in the Talmud, you're going to basically have the Talmudic era would basically be the eras of the Tanaim and the Amoraim. But there's so the Tanaim would be from the end of the Bible until the completion of the Mishnah, and the Amoraim would be from the completion of the Mishnah to the sealing of the Babylonian Talmud. And then after that you had the Savarai, that was a briefer period. Those were the ones who really redacted the Talmud to the form that we have it now. We don't really speak that much about the Savarai. And then you have the Gaonim, that would be the early medieval period, kind of from the year 600 which is when the Babylonian Talmud was sealed, until about the year 900 to close to the year 1000 of the Common Era. and then from the year about 950, 1000 until the 1500s. In the Common Era, you had the Rishonim, which would be that means the first ones. Those are the medieval authorities. Then, right in the middle, in the 1500s, you have the Poskim, the Shulchan Aruch, and then everything that's post Shulchan Aruch, or the Achronim, everything from the 1500s to today. That's the era that we live in. And so there's higher authority is placed upon the Tanaim than over than over subsequent authorities. We really didn't get to the crux of this question of racism and the Talmud at this point, which we will address. But like I said, and so we'll probably have to make a separate video about that, because we're already 11 minutes in, and I'm almost to work, so I don't really have time to discuss more. But essentially, what you're going to have in the Talmud, if you study it, and it's all available in English online. You go to sefaria.org or .com, I forgot which one it is, and you really have, with an excellent explanation from Rabbi Steinsaltz, who just passed away a few weeks ago, all for free online in the original Hebrew Aramaic text and in English, with a lot of explanation that really clarifies the text. It's all there. It's all available for free online. That was one of the things that I know I read, that David Duke was claiming that the Jews were trying to hide the Talmud from the masses. You can't just go to the library and get a Talmud. Well, that claim has been debunked. In fact, David Duke claimed that when he was younger, he was very interested in Judaism, and he was very pro-Jewish until he came across this quote-unquote filth of the Talmud and so forth. But the truth of the matter is, and so he claimed that there's this effort to hide and conceal the Talmud, and the truth is that right now it's not true at all. It's something that's readily available for free online. Anybody can access it. But it's a lot of arguments back and forth, a lot of different opinions, and most of those opinions are rejected. So just because you're going to find a statement somewhere in the Talmud doesn't mean that that's something that's accepted. I remember some years ago, a neighbor of mine was trying to explain, someone to his Orthodox Jewish wife, what the Christian New Testament is, and what he said was that it's like their Talmud. It's what they added on after the Bible that both Jews and Christians share, the Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, although some Christians have more books in their Old Testament. Some of the older traditional churches have more books. Depends on that are not in our Hebrew Bible. And so the term Old Testament is not necessarily, although it's also offensive to us as Jews because we see it as current, not as old. But I don't have a problem with Christians calling it that, but I'm saying it's not proper for a Jew to call our Tanakh the Old Testament unless you're explaining to Christians what you're talking about. Then it is appropriate. So that's why I use the term. But the truth is that technically speaking, the term Old Testament is not. It includes all of our Hebrew Bible, but it's not necessarily exhaustive to say that the Hebrew Bible is the Old Testament, depending on the church. In general, most of the Protestant churches only include what's in the Jewish Hebrew Bible as their Old Testament, and if they do print these other books in their Bible, they're going to call them Apocrypha, whereas the Catholics and the Orthodox might use the term Deuterocanon, but really it's just simply part of their Old Testament. But that's neither here nor there. But the fact of the matter is, it's not the same. Meaning Christians see their New Testament as Scripture, which is, more authoritative than the Talmud is. I'm saying for Christians, but also meaning you can't compare the way Christians look at the New Testament to the way that Jews look at the Talmud, because Christians look at the New Testament as the Bible. We don't look at the Talmud as the Bible. We don't say that every word that's in the Talmud is the gospel truth. We do believe it's a mitzvah to read these words to connect to God, but it's not any way on the level of Scripture. That's another lie that a lot of the anti-Talmud rhetoric will claim, is that the Jews believe that the Talmud is holier than the Bible. That's an absolute lie. And there are many things we could do to prove that. One is, for example, if a handwritten scroll of the 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible, God forbid, would, let's say, fall on the floor, we have a very strong tradition that to atone for such a horrible event, one would, anybody who witnesses such a thing would have to fast for 40 days. It's not exactly a law like that, but it's a very well-known tradition. And if, God forbid, one of these scrolls is damaged to the point where it's no longer usable liturgically, it's afforded a burial and a funeral just like a human being. That's not the case with the book of the Talmud. We might bury a book of the Talmud that's not used anymore, but if it falls on the floor, maybe you give it a little kiss or something just to show some respect. But it's not afforded anywhere near the holiness of the Bible. That's a very major difference, and certainly it's not given a funeral or anything like that. So I'm at work now. I don't have time really to talk more about this, but we'll talk maybe later. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we'll see you all later. Take care.